the book is so intriguing. It's like the more you study it, you just keep finding more, and it's like uh, I'm just fascinated with the imagery and the symbolism and the way it communicates and the visions of the throne room of God and the inspiration to worship. And I'm intrigued both spiritually and just from the standpoint of this kind of literature this is.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm so excited to be here again with Dr. Dave Mathewson, Dr. Dave. If you listened to the first episode, you know that we spent our whole time wading through some, kind of out there questions, but also some very relevant questions about the book of Revelation, everything from offbeat themes and to genuine curiosities that I would highly recommend you listen to it because it was so very fun. Back again is Dr. Dave Mathewson. He is a Revelation scholar for sure, and we're going to talk about that. And he has written this book called A Companion to the Book of Revelation. I highly recommend it. Get it on Amazon. So if you're going to read Revelation, I'm just telling you, you need a guide. Dave is our guide, and his book is our guide. So we're fortunate for that. And so we're going to actually shift our focus into Dave's book and talk about chapters 1 and 2. And in this chapters 1 and 2, we're really seeing the big picture of he sets the stage of how to actually read Revelation without getting all tangled up in confusion, which I'm pretty sure that happens a lot, that people start it enthusiastically. It's kind of like Leviticus, and then somewhere along the way, they get a little tangled up and they get very confused. Would you say that's true, that people scratch their head over the book?
Oh, yes, definitely. It's, there's two extremes to Revelation. Those that they're just infatuated with it and trying to crack the code and figure out how close we are to the end and what events in our day are predicted by John. And then the other approach is, it's so confusing, I'll just ignore it and I'll retreat to the Gospels or something like that.
I mean, we talked about that when we got together for lunch to talk about this podcast series, how people will just ignore it because, well, one, they're intimidated by it or scared of it or freaked out. I mean, why do they ignore it? What do you think?
I think that's one of them. They're afraid of it. I think another one is I hear a lot of people saying, well, Revelation, it's so negative. It's all about judgment and doom and things like that. As they don't, it's just psychologically, it's depressing for some of them to read it. And so they steer away from it. I think it's confusing. What do I make of all these images and, the beasts and the fire and sulfur and all, what am I supposed to make of that? And then on top of that, the fact that, if they read enough, they'll find out that, there's other approaches besides the left behind approach. And so they start, they hear sermons and there's different views of it and nobody can agree. And so, it's easier to.
So let's just talk about the Left Behind series for just 1 minute, since you brought it up. Series written by Jenkins and I can't remember their names. Yeah, who are they? Yes, and hugely popular in the 1990s. Is that the time frame? Yeah. Actually, my son read those books, and really it made him more interested in his faith. But they're deeply flawed. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think from the perspective of how they understand Revelation and tell us to interpret it, I think they are flawed. But again, I would say one of the things that I find, at least one thing that the Left Behind series did, it got the coming of Christ back on our radar.
Oh, yeah,
because
sure.
You think 2,000 years later, it is easy to think, Christ, maybe we don't consciously think this, but we act like, I have the rest of my life. Things are just going to go on as usual for some time. And one of the things the Left Behind series did at least is get people thinking, even if it did it the wrong way, get us thinking more about that Christ could come back at any time. Christ is going to come back and bring judgment and salvation and bring to a climax his promises of judgment and salvation. And so,
honestly, that's an important endeavor, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's not take it so far off our radar that we never think about it. Well, Dave, you've been exploring this book for 35 years, since you were a child, since you were a kid right out of college. What pulled you into this book? The why you like it so much, and what keeps you coming back?
That's a good question. The question is, the second part of the question, what makes me keep coming back, is just that the book is so intriguing. It's like the more you study it, you just keep finding more, and it's like I'm just fascinated with the imagery and the symbolism and the way it communicates, and the visions of the throne room of God and the inspiration to worship. And I'm intrigued both spiritually and just from the standpoint of this kind of literature this is, and the impact that it has reading it. But what got me into it, I was actually raised in a church, not my parents emphasizing this, but the church that approached Revelation very much from a Left Behind approach. And so I grew up being afraid, not so much of Revelation, I was afraid that, what if I missed the rapture? And
that would be bad.
I would come home sometime from high school and there'd be nobody in the house, and I'd wonder if that. I grew up with some of that, and at one point, after seeing that for a while and seeing that some of these predictions I'd heard growing up didn't come to pass, I thought, well, that's not the way to approach this book, but I don't know what it is, so I'm going to ignore it. And I did what everybody else did, and I read the Gospels, and I became interested in Paul's letters and other things, and never had a class in college on Revelation. Actually didn't have a class in seminary on the book of Revelation, but I did have a course where, just to make a long story short, I was I was required by one of my professors.
Asked to write something.
I was strongly encouraged to write a paper on the millennium in Revelation 20 that I did not want to do. And I almost went and asked the professor if I could change my topic, and I decided, no, that's I'm not going to be that kind of student. I'm just going to do it. I'll get it over with, and I can move on. And writing that paper, I'm not sure I came to a good solution to the millennium, but just researching that paper and being introduced to what kind of book Revelation was, and some of these images just fascinated me. And God used that just to kind of chart my course for what I was going to focus on for the rest of my life. And since that time, I haven't been able to get away from it.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is. And
he had a plan for you. Little did you know it was the book of Revelation.
No idea. That was the furthest thing from my mind. And I was like everybody else. I don't want anything. If there would have been a course offered on Revelation, I probably wouldn't have taken it before that course. And then,
well, now you offer courses on it, so you've righted that wrong for sure.
I teach Revelation regularly at the seminary.
Yeah.
And then a year later, I had Dr. Craig Blomberg for a class, and there's a paper on the kind of literature Revelation was and how it affected the way you interpreted chapter 12 and 13, two chapters right in the middle of Revelation. So I chose that intentionally as my topic, and that further solidified. After I was done with that, I was like, there's no getting away from this book.
No getting away. So you talk a lot in this book about the message of hope. Hope is important to you. Is that what you're getting spiritually from this book? From the book of Revelation? How is it feeding your spiritual life?
Yeah, there's two ways. Number one, it is the hope element. And what I would say about that too is the hope that Revelation provides is not one day I'm going to go be whisked away into heaven, into the clouds.
That's what I think, right.
And I grew up with that. I remember I joke, I remember telling people when I was a little boy, I'd walk outside, and if it was a clear day, there were no clouds, I would say, "Oh, Jesus must not be coming today because there's no clouds in the sky."
Yeah, I
Revelation,
like
when
that.
Jesus said he was coming on the clouds in Revelation 6.
Right. No, I think the cloud now is this, and he's
That's
coming
it.
in
That's it.
this,
Yes,
right?
he's going to appear at my iPhone. But when you read chapter 21 and 22, and in light of the whole Bible storyline starting in Genesis, our hope is a physical, resurrected bodies on a new earth. And that excites me. I'm not sure it excites me as much to float away off into heaven, but to think about, man, our destination, my hope is. I live in Colorado as you do, Sandy, and I love the
Yes.
mountains. I know not everybody does, not everyone resonates with this, but I love the mountains. I love being outdoors, and I look at it and I think, man, can you imagine a world like this with all the effects of sins, no death, no cancer, no
Ah,
sickness, no broken relationships, no
wonderful. Yeah.
justice? Can you imagine a world? That's what Revelation provides, and that's our hope. And that's what inspires me. The other thing that really spiritually ministers to me is the vision of worship, especially in chapter 4 and 5. It's just, I read those two chapters and I can hardly do so without breaking down in tears. The vision of God and his throne and all of creation, all of the angelic beings in unison worshiping, shouting. We domesticate that, but heaven just erupts in worship at the Lamb taking the scroll. And man, I read that and I just envision that scene in my mind and being part of that heavenly worship. So
That's so beautiful. I mean, I love that imagery because it's so beyond what we've ever encountered.
mhm.
So something so big, monumental, so relevant to us and where our heart is would only, I think, I would probably just fall on the ground and
Mhm.
just be in awe.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Like, tell me though about the parts of this book that you find challenging and how have you navigated the more tricky parts of it over the years?
Yeah, I think the most challenging parts are the trumpet and bowl sequences. When you think about
Okay.
not only trying to understand those, what they are and what the first readers would have made of them, but how they're relevant today. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's a Revelation scholar from Britain, and we were talking one time.
Oh, do you guys get together and have revelation discussions
Yeah, we
and,
do. We have
you know,
at the Evangelical Theological Society conference every fall. There's a Revelation section, and I'm one on the steering committee for it, and
I love
we
that.
do nerdy things with Revelation.
Yeah, nerdy revelation
But
things.
anyway, I was talking to him, and we both agreed probably the most difficult text to preach out of in Revelation would be chapter 8 and 9 and chapter 16, which would be the trumpets and the bowl sequences. What do you say about those? What are those doing there? And it's one thing to try to analyze it from a first century perspective, or in light of the context of Revelation, what's going on, but to read those with relevance to our modern day is tricky. Let alone to try to figure out, what would this picture of a hail mixed with fire. I mean, what in the world is? Again, we're prone to jump to the 21st century and find something. Oh, this is what it's referring to. But what would they have made of that? And what do I do with that kind of thing today? So those are the two sections that I think I find the most challenging as far as.
You think that people so there's evergreen parts of it that have always been challenging and may always be challenging?
Yeah, I think so. I think Revelation has an interesting. I think it's doing a couple things, but that interesting thing in chapter 10 where John hears these seven thunders and he's about to write, and he's told don't write. So it's like, oh, so we don't know everything. Uh,
Oh.
so it's
So he knew more than he said.
yeah.
He knew more.
Yeah. John must have known more than he told us, and so I think there's and I don't want to say Revelation is a mysterious book that we can't figure out. No, I think we can figure it out. But
Yeah,
there's always going to
right.
be enough of it that is without beyond our reach. And I think that's one of the reasons I keep coming back. But lest we become too prideful, and I think there's going to be enough of it that we're just not going to figure out until.
But we'll know all about it once we're
Yeah,
there
yeah,
in the throne room.
yeah,
Like we'll know the whole story
yeah,
at that point, which will be great.
yeah.
You'll be in particular like, oh, I
Right.
get
That's
it. I
right.
get it all now.
If anybody wants to know, I suppose you can line up behind me to ask John what he meant.
I love that idea. Maybe we could have a seminar with
Right,
John
right,
and you could be asking the questions, like a
right. An
discussion.
evangelical theological society and creation.
I want to go. I want to
I'll
go.
be there to get
Well,
things right finally.
exactly. Finally. Well, in reading your book, I was struck by how you managed to blend these clear explanations, which are so, so helpful, with some great theological insight. It really guides the reader through these complexities of Revelation, but it never loses sight of the heart and the message. So, once again, I would encourage people to read it. But let's start a few questions for you. Let's start some groundwork. We're talking about chapters 1 and 2, and you laid this groundwork so nicely, the context. Tell us about who wrote Revelation, in your opinion, and when it was written, and what was going on in the world that shaped John's approach. So give us just a quick snapshot, if you will, so that we can get our bearings for the book.
Yeah. So first of all, I think everybody agrees that a man named John wrote the book, and he tells us that.
Okay, a man named
Yeah,
John.
but even among evangelical Christian scholars, there's disagreement as to his precise identity. I personally think you can make a good case that John the Apostle, the same author as the fourth gospel, I think, wrote the book of Revelation, and I think that's as probably has as good a support as any view, and that was the view of some of the early church fathers in the second century, third century, that also attributed Revelation to John the Apostle. And so I think there's all kinds of.
Let's go with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any better. You can't say 100%, but I don't think there's any view that has you can make a better case for than that. Why is written? Again, I like to see. I picked this up from Eugene Peterson's little book called Reverse Thunder, and he refers to John as Pastor John sometimes. And there's some truth to that, because John is speaking to seven churches, and probably more than that. Seven, yeah, there's seven literal churches. You probably have two, maybe. I've been to those churches,
Yes.
locations, but probably there's seven is symbolic of perfection and completeness. So there are probably other churches that read this too. These are representative of the church more broadly in the Roman Empire. And the common issue that John seems to be aware of is having a prophetic and pastoral ministry with these churches is they're simply suffering, or they're struggling to live out their faithful witness. I think that's a key, faithful witness. You find that over when there's references to the saints being persecuted, they're persecuted because of their witness to Jesus Christ. So they're struggling with, how do we live out our faithful witness in a hostile environment, in an empire like Rome that is godless and idolatrous and murderous. It promises peace, it promises prosperity in exchange for loyalty to it. In a context where in all the cities that these churches existed in, there were opportunities that were strongly encouraged and even enforced to be involved in worship of pagan gods, worship of the emperor, showing allegiance and loyalty to Rome, being involved in an economy that was tied to idolatry and injustice. And so Revelation, John is trying to help the churches through a vision that God gives him. John now records it and sends it to them to help them to see what is really going on. Like I said, revelation means an unveiling. Apocalypse is a Greek word, uncovering, unveiling. John is uncovering and unveiling. Here's what's really going on so that you can respond appropriately.
Mm-hmm. So, you said that this was really for all of the churches. What do you think was happening on a spiritual level with the people in these churches? Were they struggling with finding what God wanted, or were they struggling with the pressure or misinformation? What was happening with them in general?
That's really a good question. Like I said, that only two of the churches were being persecuted for their faith. That Philadelphia and Smyrna are the two churches that, if you read the messages of the seven churches, they're not letters, actually. They're prophetic messages from Jesus.
Important.
You read the messages of the seven churches, as I said, only two of them receive an exclusively positive evaluation by Christ. So in chapter 1, Jesus is the exalted Son of Man. He walks among the lampstands to evaluate them. And only two churches receive a positive evaluation because they have maintained their faithful witness. They have not given up. They've stood fast in their witness, even though it means persecution and suffering. The other five, there's kind of a scale as to how they have spiritually taken seriously their witness to Christ. And some of them, it's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes the church, Jesus will say, you're doing this well, but I have questions.
So in chapter 2 and 3, which again are not technically letters, they're messages, they're prophetic messages from Jesus to the church, as the one who, in chapter 1, he stands among the lampstands, ready to evaluate his churches, and which he does in chapter 2 and 3 through these prophetic messages. And two of the churches, only two of them receive positive evaluations because they are maintaining their faithful witness and suffering the consequences for it. The other five, there's kind of a scale of how they are evaluated. They're all evaluated, there's a negative aspect, but sometimes it'll begin positively. Jesus will say, I commend you for this and this, but I have this against you. Or Jesus will say, I have this against you, you're not doing this and this, but there are some in your midst who are being faithful. But then you get to Laodicea, and he doesn't have anything good to say about them. So it's all of them are challenged. Are challenged by their circumstances, and they all respond in different ways. So Jesus's critique of them and his evaluation of them reflects, in a sense, how they have chosen to respond to the environment as far as whether they're living out their faithful witness or not. So it kind of comes down to how seriously do they take their relationship to Jesus Christ? How much are they willing to sacrifice for the sake of Christ? Their wealth, their status in society, their comfort.
It sounds like there's it sounds like the modern church today, number one. It's a question of faithfulness and obedience, which you also really stress that in your book, that he's looking for obedience, not just belief, but is there a standard by which we should all take from that, the message to the churches?
I think the main message is for the church to carry out and maintain their faithful witness no matter what the consequences it brings. And that might not be the same in, what I might, the consequences for maintaining my faithful witness in my location may not be the same as my brothers and sisters overseas, but I think we're all called upon, I look at it, we're called upon to witness to the reality of who Christ is and who God is, that there is a God in heaven on his throne, that Jesus as the slain lamb has accomplished his plan of redemption, and has come to suffer and die. And so I think so that we're witnesses to that reality in a world that resists that and contests that. And one of my favorite verses in Revelation is chapter 14, verse 4, that describes the people of God as those, they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And I think that's what the churches are called upon to do, follow the Lamb wherever he goes, which often means the way of suffering and sacrifice because of our faithful witness. Christ, he's the one called the faithful witness.
Yeah.
And he suffered for his faithful witness to the truth of the gospel and who God is and what Christ has come to accomplish. And we're called to do the same thing, and to follow him wherever he goes means that we may be called upon to suffer the same.
And our suffering is all unique to us, or,
right.
different for each of us.
Right.
So you talk about John's story, and you say there's probably different ways to tell the story. So you have your own envisioning of the plot. And I found that very helpful. Can you walk us through your explanation of the plot? I think that would be helpful as an overview of what people should expect as they're reading it.
Yeah, I think, and part of the problem is when we read Revelation, as we've kind of been talking, we tend to look at it we tend to divide it up, and we get infatuated with the images and the details of the text, and we don't see that this is a narrative, a story that fits together. And the way I understand it is, it starts in chapter 4 and 5 for a reason. And in chapter 4 and 5, you find heaven as a place where God's sovereignty and his holiness and the Lamb's worthiness and the Lamb's role in accomplishing God's plan of redemption, those are all perfectly realized and acknowledged in heaven. The problem is it isn't on earth. And the story of Revelation is, how does God's will in heaven and his kingdom being realized, his sovereignty being realized, his holiness, the Lamb being worthy, and the Lamb accomplishing as God's plan of redemption, how does that get realized on an earth that contests it and sets itself up as sovereign? And for example, in the form of the Roman government, how will that take place? And in a sense, Revelation chapter 4 and 5, starting with that, the rest of Revelation is, how will 4 and 5 become a reality on earth? And so in chapter 21 and 22, it finally does, in a new heavens and a new earth. So you find God's throne, God and the Lamb are on the throne in heaven. That throne is now in the center of the new creation. And all of creation now centers around acknowledging who God is. So that the way to look at Revelation then, I think, is, you have 4 and 5, 21 and 22. Everything in between, chapter 6 through 20, is the story of how does heaven finally come down to earth? How does that heavenly reality finally become a reality on earth? And it's a story of how God is initially judging humanity through the bowls and the seals and things like that, and trumpets. It's how the church is supposed to be a faithful witness. That's what I think you find happening in 6 through 20 is the church. The church is supposed to be God's faithful witness, to call the nations, to call people to repentance, to demonstrate the reality as a kingdom of priests. People should be able to look at the church and see a glimpse of the new creation in 21 and 22. And I think I mentioned in the book, too, Richard Bauckham, a British scholar, he said Revelation, he's not saying John was intentionally doing this, but he said Revelation could be seen as a kind of a commentary on the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 7. Our Father who is in heaven, Matthew 6, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The as it is in heaven is 4 and 5. God's will and his kingdom are fully acknowledged in heaven. And then the prayer is let that come to earth. And that's chapter 21 and 22. So chapter 1 and 21 and 22 the new creation, is a response to, is the answer to the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth, chapter 1 and 21 and 22, as it already is in heaven, in chapter 4 and 5.
I love that. You were talking about that. It's such a great way to see it. Like, how is this going to happen? Because we want it to happen, and now here's the way it happens, that we're getting the actual information we need about how it will happen. And there's several parts to how it happens. And we may not understand it all, but in the end, this is exactly what we pray for. So that's a clever way to look at it.
Yeah. And you think about it too, and I don't want to make it easier than it sounds, but you think about, what is the church supposed to be doing today? We're witnessing to that reality. We're a microcosm of, and we're witnessing to that reality of a new creation where God is and the Lamb are at the center. We are witnessing to that. So discipleship and church, what we do in church and church programs, evangelism, et cetera, all of that goes back to, here's what the church is supposed to be doing. We are witnesses to this reality in a world that goes against that.
Do you think the church is doing a good job at that, or like in Revelation, some are and some are not?
I think, yeah, that's a good point. I think that some are and some aren't, and even in the first century, I think the seven churches being symbolic of the entire church is I don't think John is saying each of these churches represent a certain period of time. He's just saying all throughout the centuries you can see that, sometimes the church is doing a very good job, and there are places in the world today, and even in the United States, I see the church doing a wonderful job. At other times, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, and we all have to deal with that, even on a personal level, as we're picking a church and joining a church and figuring out what church means to us, because we're called to go to church, so it matters. Well, you also talk about the central figures in the book after talking about the storyline. And I mean, you have to admit that some of them, like hearing the word the lamb and the dragon, it sounds a bit like a fantasy novel, a fantasy fiction. Tell us more about these two main characters and how they uniquely capture the tension throughout Revelation, but also the hope. And what should we pay attention to when it comes to these two characters as we're reading the book?
Yeah, one thing, I mean, Revelation, excuse me, Revelation kind of, in a sense, it's at least a lot of it is to be seen as a conflict between God and Christ, and then Satan and the dragon and the two beasts. Yeah. And the dragon and the two beasts are responsible for the opposition to God and his kingdom, but also to the people of God, which that's God's earthly program for witnessing to and bringing about the establishment of his kingdom on earth. So in the one sense, again, what John is doing is he's, you said it reads a little bit like a fantasy piece of fantasy literature. In a sense, it does. Yeah. It's supposed to do that. The difference is Revelation is still referring to real persons and places and events that are taking place and are going to take place, unlike, reading Lord of the Rings or something like that.
Great book.
So it is. So Revelation, that's why I said it can be read just for its literary intrigue, and it is a fascinating read. But at the heart of it, though, it is meant to be taken seriously as an unveiling of what is really going on in the world, and that there is truly a God and his Son, Jesus Christ, the Lamb, who has accomplished redemption and is working out his plan to bring about the establishment of his kingdom on earth. We can't miss that, however we take it. But it appears to me that in one sense you have, the protagonist, which God and the Lamb, and then his people, the church, and then the dragon and the two beasts and their allies that try to oppose them. And the interesting thing throughout the book is you can't read very far into the book and you get the sense that it's really not a conflict at all. So it's not like you're waiting with, oh, what's going to happen? You kind of know. Even it's just even in chapter 12, where Satan is defeated in a battle, it's intriguing that. In fact, I think that's true throughout the book. Even in chapter 20, where Satan is bound and thrown into the pit, it's an angel that does it. It's almost as if God is saying, I don't even have to do this. It's not like you have two equal powers going at each other and to see who emerges victorious. It's like, no, God is the true sovereign. And Satan, in chapter 12, when Satan's defeated, it's not God or the Lamb that defeats him. It's the Michael, the archangel.
Right.
And so
the message is that it doesn't even take the whole strength of God to defeat our enemy. It's just
in the end he does, but he just sends it on fire from heaven. It's not like he has to do anything, in some feat of strength or display of power, which we normally think of in a wrestling match, or fighting match, or MMA or something like that.
MMA, sure. I mean, Lord of the Rings probably has a bigger, more epic, battle between MMA. But okay, I get what you're going with that. So I love that, because then that would make me feel like I would never have to worry about God coming out as victorious. And that he, as my champion, I'm also going to come out as victorious. So
and you hear people saying, I hear a lot, and sometimes it's I call it an end around move to avoid having to deal with the other issues in the book. But people say, I know what Revelation's about, God wins. And I think there's truth that I think that's it's not wrong, it's just way insufficient, deficient in Revelation. But there's truth of that, is as you said, part of the message of Revelation. I don't have to worry about the outcome of this at all.
But we should care about it. Like, we should care because we're his people. And as his vice regents, we should be respectful and obedient, as you often say. So, moving on.
We don't have to worry about the outcome doesn't mean we can just sit back and wait for it to happen.
That's just too bad, because I was kind of hoping for that, just sitting back.
I know. That would be great if I could,
I do feel more relaxed about it, though. I have to say that being a Christian makes me feel more at peace. I mean, it gives us a peace of understanding what's going to happen, which is good.
Yeah, it gives us a hope, and it gives us a reason for entering into conflict with the evil one, in maintaining our faithful witness. No matter, we don't have to fear the consequences because of the hope that we have of the outcome.
It's still very hard to be in any kind of a spiritual warfare position, though. I think we probably both know that. So the next area you talk about is symbolism, okay? And those famous numbers, they're everywhere. It's like a puzzle box of numbers, like a Rubik's Cube, 4, 6, 7, 12. It can almost feel like a code, and people read it that way. So help guide us through why he would use these symbols and numbers and how they unlock a deeper meaning.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up numbers, because I think even the numbers are meant to be taken symbolically or metaphorically. And in other words, they're not there for the numerical values or the length of time, the temporal value that they would offer. They're there for the theological meaning or the metaphorical meaning. And trying to think where I was going with this.
Well, you think the numbers,
right. So, for example, we have the most famous one is the number 7. So when the author uses the number 7 in his vision, especially in chapter 4 through 22, it's always, why are there 7 seals? Why not 10 or why not 3 or what? It's because 7 indicates either perfection or completeness.
Yeah.
And so this is the complete judgment of God. 7 trumpets. This is the complete. I don't think John is saying you can count off 7 and that's all there are. Or there's going to be 7 distinct judgments that follow in this order. He's just saying this is the complete
Okay.
judgment
This is it
of God.
in total. Yeah.
Right, in total. Or the number 12. When you get to, whenever, often when John describes a people of God, it's like with 144,000. Or in the New Jerusalem, why is the city of Jerusalem, all the measurements are multiples of 12?
Right.
It's because 12 is the number of the people of God. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles of the Lamb. So again, John's not saying, the city is literally, he's not giving you an architectural blueprint. He's saying this is the complete, perfect people of God.
Yeah.
The final manifestation of God's people in fulfillment of
like
God's
the number 144,000, that's not the literal number of people that are going to be there.
Yeah, again,
some people say that.
Right, it's John's thinking 12 times 12, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. So 12 being the people of God in Old Testament, New Testament, 12 times 12 is 144 times 1,000, a large, complete, whole number. So this is the full, complete people of God. So he's not saying, there's going to be 144,000 and after that, good luck.
That's it. Yeah, good luck.
So he's not using the numbers. Back in chapter 2, which church is it? He says you will be thrown in prison for 10 days, or you will suffer persecution for 10 days.
Yeah.
Why 10? Well, I think even that is symbolic of a limited, it'll be intense, but a limited period of time. That happens to be the amount of time that in the book of Daniel, that the 3 friends of Daniel were tested for a period of 10 days. So I think all John is saying is you'll be tested for a period, a short, he's not saying after 10 days of, you're free, you're out of the weeds after that and you're safe. He's just saying you're going to suffer, but it's going to be for a limited period of time in this using, and John uses his numbers like that a lot, not to give you a literal period of time, but for their symbolic or metaphorical value to say something.
Aren't you glad they're not all literal numbers? Like,
yes.
In a way, if you thought about it, it would be like, makes it so much harder. But
right.
You mentioned the book of Daniel, and you said this early on, that this connection with the Old Testament, there's so much of it, and the numbers are part of that. And that's important because as you talk about the first century readers would have been more familiar with those stories or would have known them. So when you say that the number of days that Daniel and his friends were tested, or his friends were tested, and now this, they would be like, I can draw the conclusion or the parallel there, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it helpful to read the Old Testament before you read Revelation?
I think so. I mean, John writes in a way that seems to assume his readers will know, and not, even in the first century, I'm sure they didn't all know the Old Testament to the same degree, but John expected that everybody would know at least something of the kinds of connections that he expected that they would draw with the Old Testament. Yeah.
What about the numbers being related to Hebrew? Is that a thing too? Because there's no numbers in Hebrew, that they all have meaning?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of, even, you look at the numbers, the time periods that John uses to describe the period of tribulation, 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, all of those come out of the Old Testament.
Okay.
Like 3.5 years comes from Daniel's times, and time and a half.
Right.
Or times and half a time. And the 1,260 days, Daniel has 1,290 days. So I think, again, John is taking numbers from even Daniel that would have been familiar to his readers to now say what Daniel was predicting is now being fulfilled in the tribulation that you're undergoing starting in the first century. And again, John's point is not to say it's going to only last 3.5 years or 7 years or whatever. His point is, think about it. What is 3.5 years? It's half of 7.
That's true.
So what's John saying? He's not saying it's only going to last 3.5 years and then you're done and then Christ is coming back. He's saying, as intense as this period of tribulation might get, it falls far short of it's only limited. It falls far short of the perfect number 7. 42 months. Where's that come from? It picks up the number 40 of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. It was a period of testing. And I think by saying 42 months, again, John isn't saying it's only going to last 42 months and then it's done. He's saying in the same way that the God's people, Israel, underwent a period of testing in the wilderness, so this will be a period of testing for the church. And again, all of these are limited, 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days. They're limited periods of time, and that's John's message. This period of tribulation, as bad as it might get, as long as it might seem, it's going to come to an end. It won't last. It's limited.
So be hopeful for that, even when you're in your own personal period of tribulation, it's going to come to an end, which is true. I've certainly seen that in my own journey. You also speak about prophecy. Tell us a little bit more about this foretelling versus forthtelling, because I think people get that very confused. They kind of hear prophecy and they think this is some sort of a future crystal ball. But you point out there is a big difference between predicting the future and delivering a message that we need right now. So explain the difference and share and tell us a little bit about how Revelations incorporates both angles there.
Yes. And of course, Revelation is a prophecy. He tells us that several times. But Sandy, you're right. The problem is our conception of what prophecy is and does. We tend to think of it as, like going to having your palm read or something like that, or looking into a crystal ball and someone predicting your future. And prophecy does have a future element to it, but by its nature, prophecy is not primarily about foretelling the future. Yes, it does that. But the primary function of prophecy is to proclaim a message to the church or to Israel in the Old Testament. And go back to the Old Testament. When did God raise up prophets in Israel? It's when the Israelites were, when they're reneging on their covenant relationship, they're straying, they're going into idolatry, and God raises up prophets to warn them about that. Yes, and it does include an indication of, but in the future, it doesn't include prediction, but not for the sake of just predicting the future so they can know what it is, but to assure them that God will still keep his promise of restoring you, bringing about judgment and salvation. But it was meant to be a message that warned the Israelites not to violate their covenant relationship and to repent and move away from idolatry. And that's what Revelation is. In fact, those 7 messages, as I said, they're not letters, those 7 messages of the churches in 2 and 3, all the 5 of them are calls to the church to repent. And so Revelation does have a future element. Look at especially chapter 20 or 19 through 22. It's all future. What's going to happen when Christ returns? But that is meant to call the readers to repentance in the present. And the whole book is meant to be an encouragement, yes, but a warning against
an exhortation, you have to do certain things. I still want you to do certain things. So John really is a prophet then, correct?
Yes, he's calling the church to repentance. He's encouraging them, those that are suffering, but he's calling them to repentance. And in the meantime, he is reminding them of the future hope as a motivation for living life in the future. But you're right. He's a prophet encouraging and exhorting the church as they did in the Old Testament.
I like the whole encouragement about what's to come, so we never lose sight of the fact that the battle's already won, but we're still in this heaven's not quite on earth yet, period. Right. Yeah, that whole tension. So I have one more question. If it's really practical tips for us. So if I'm looking at the book of Revelation for the first time or the 20th time and feeling a little overwhelmed, what's a simple strategy that you would offer to navigate it? And I know we've covered this, but just concisely say what you think John wants us to take away from it, to walk away from it.
I would say two things. Number one, I would say read the book as a whole and don't get too bogged down in figuring out what are these 7 bowls referred to and what is this image. I don't say those aren't important, but don't get bogged down. Read the book as a whole. As we said, it's a story. And focus on Jesus Christ. See it. Read the book of Revelation as an encouragement to follow Jesus Christ in obedience, to worship him no matter what the consequences it brings to you. And read it like that. Read through it sometime, think and ask yourself, how does this encourage me to obey Christ more, follow him more closely? How does this encourage me in my walk with Christ? And how does it move me to worship him? And no matter what the consequences, how great or small that might be.
I love that. And you said that when we were at lunch, like, just sit down and read the whole book, which that's not often the way that we approach studying the Bible. But it's such a great, because you said something very important, which is this is the way it would have been done in the first century, right? They would have read the whole book.
Right. Yeah. When whoever brought the book to the 7 churches, I'm sure some of them probably would have studied, but they wouldn't have sat down and had a 10-week series on the book of Revelation. They would have had it sat down and had it read to them in one sitting.
With a task to follow, right? And several papers to write. With
refreshments to follow and question and answer sessions.
Yeah. And everybody discussing, I don't know, I think he meant that word. What he meant was this word.
That's right.
But so that gives you a good feeling of the big picture thinking. We always should look at that.
Yes, yeah.
I feel like we covered a lot of groundwork from chapters 1 and 2, which I think are so good foundationally. And next time we're going to move forward in the book and discuss future chapters. I think 18 and 19. Or 19 and 20, 21, 22, which I'm excited about. That'll be a little bit more detail level and what your thinking is about it exegetically, I guess. That's how we would say it. Do you have any closing thoughts on the topics that we discussed today? Anything you want to reiterate or say?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is not to be afraid of the book of Revelation. And I think to avoid the two extremes. Number one, just, the infatuation with a book where we're trying to figure out and equate things in our day with Revelation and we see it as kind of a mysterious code that we're to crack. And we now are the privileged generation, we can figure it out. Or the opposite extreme, we're afraid of it, or we're confused by it, so we ignore it. No, I think to avoid both of those, because it's a message. This is part of our scripture. It's a revelation of Jesus Christ to his church, so we should be reading it. We should be hearing it. What is God saying to his church through Revelation today? So I think avoiding those two extremes and reading the book and genuinely wanting to hear God's voice and wanting to hear God addressing my church and me individually through this book.
I mean, that's a great way to frame it up, because we don't need to be afraid and we don't need to be some kind of a prognosticator of the future. We can take what is valuable for us and our church today, every generation. So, well, thank you for that. I'm looking forward to our 2 next episodes, and thanks for all of your effort to help us understand it. I really appreciate it, Dave.
Good. Thank you.
Then we'll talk to you very soon.